Thank you for joining us today at this Green Infrastructure Week webinar. My name is Glenn Caligari and I work with Ecologic doing data management and analysis. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting or attending from today, which for me is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and the elders of other Aboriginal communities who might be with us here today. So in November, the Wurundjeri season is grass flowering season. This time of year brings increasingly warmer weather, which is quite welcome after this year's Melbourne winter, along with blooming wildflowers and grasses. I'm very aware that it's grass flowering season at the moment because the hay fever tablets have well and truly come out. But I think that just serves to remind us that despite our built environment, we're still very much a part of the land cycles. For thousands of years, the Wurundjeri people have understood these cycles, living sustainably and managing local resources. Their knowledge of caring for country teaches us the importance of using resources responsibly and leaving the land in a better condition for future generations. As we go through Greener Infrastructure Week, today and in other sessions, let's keep these principles in mind as we work towards a sustainable and circular relationship with our environment. So the session we have today is Build Waste In, Plan Waste Out. We've got three great speakers lined up to take us through the session, where we'll explore how infrastructure projects can achieve sustainable outcomes by incorporating circularity principles from the outset and the interplay between different strategies. We've got Dr. Sarah King, the Technical Director of Circular Economy and Resource Recovery at GHD, who'll be giving an overview of the key pillars of the circular economy, priorities for built infrastructure, strategies for circularity, and examples. Next up, we have Chris Wilkinson from Revival. Chris will take us through how to change the way our industry approaches existing resources. And then Cameron Kaufman from the Circular Economy Specialist at Coreo will discuss leveraging circularity to capture more value and improve economic outcomes. Finally, we'll have time for a panel and audience Q&A session. So if you have any questions throughout the presentations, feel free to put them in the Q&A function in Zoom. I'll now hand over to Dr. Sarah King for our first presentation.
Thanks, Glenn. That was super introduction. Let's see if I can share screen. Just checking you can see the screen share now.
Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm dialing in from regional Victoria, so Wadawurrung country. So also pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. As Glenn said, Sarah King, I work at GHD, Technical Director, Circular Economy, also lead our amazing team of 7 people across Victoria, waste management, resource recovery. Want to say happy National Recycling Week, and it's great to be talking to you about how we build waste in and plan waste out. Let's see if the technology works in terms of moving to the next slide. Oh, this could be fun. There we go. There we go. So a little bit about GHD. GHD proudly emerged from Melbourne in 1928, a small engineering practice, and now we're a global multidisciplinary professional services organisation. We have deep technical expertise in engineering, environmental, advisory, etc. You can read that slide as well. And what we do is we tackle some of the greatest opportunities we have in the future of water, energy and communities, and the circular economy operates at the nexus of each of those challenges. Just you have to bear with me. I had a software update, so I think there's a few things running in the background. Oh, there you go. It's gone. Where's it gone? Oh, it's back? Okay.
Sarah, I'll just share the screen. Just let me know when you want to flick through the slides.
That's much better. Thank you for being promptly, Glenn. I think PowerPoint gave up. So look, we're working in a linear economy at the moment. I just want to use this slide. I love the slide. It's circular Flanders. Really simple. Keep it simple with regard to circular economy. So the linear economy we're working in, take, make, waste on the left-hand side. We've got take, make, recreate is the circular economy, and eliminating the concept of waste is exactly what we want to do here. So just move on to the next slide. So that it's really important we understand the key pillars of the circular economy. The first three pillars. So the first one being eliminate the concept of waste. The second one, we want to retain materials in our economic system for as long as possible. And the third one being regenerate nature. And we're losing biodiversity, and we need our environment to support everyone. So we must look at regenerating nature. The next slide. Okay, so with regard to the built environment, there really are two priorities. We've got net zero, decarbonisation, and circularity. Now, it's also really interesting that circular economy and circularity supports net zero. And the link that I've got there in the top right-hand side, the DOI link, is a reference to a paper that I published with Dr. Jessica Feldman earlier this year, looking at the barriers to the circular economy in Australia. So relevant to Australia, we identified 21 barriers, but one of the most cited barriers was a lack of business understanding around what circular economy is, and that's due to a couple of things. So a lack of government incentives, maybe a lack of examples, case studies, examples, and that's really interesting because we had one of the launch yesterday. We talked about challenges in the circular economy, and one of the challenges there was not to get case studies in the circular economy, but to replicate those case studies. So we have these dual challenges of trying to get different circular economy opportunities, interventions into our built environment, but also to replicate them. These are key challenges. And then on the bottom right, I just want to represent, shout out to one of the challenges we've got here, which is that, almost 40% of C&D, construction and demolition waste, in Australia is going straight, is in landfill and occupying space in our landfills. And that's one of the drivers we have for circularity. Next slide, Glenn. So one of the key drivers and levers that we have is procurement policy. And the federal government came out this year with their environmentally sustainable procurement policy. We've got Victorians, recycling first policy, but construction services that are being procured need to look at circularity as part of their procurement, part of the procurement process. And as of 1 July 2025, FFE, furniture, fittings and equipment, will also be under this policy. And in the next slide, shows what circularity is under that procurement policy. So if you're in the built environment and you're wanting to secure a federal government a contract, you need to look at circularity, which here includes durability, minimising waste in terms of buildings and fit outs, refurbishment of goods, recycled content inclusion, returning goods through resource recovery. Also looking at products that have different business models, so they're available for lease. A great example here are carpets, and Interface Floor have been using this model for quite some time now. So they lease carpets, they don't sell the product itself, they lease. That is a circular economy business model. It means the company that manufactured the product is also responsible for that product at end of life, and that since they built that product, the carpet, they have the expertise to dismantle it and reuse it. So a really useful business model. It also means the people that are using the carpet are being provided with the service, not the product. Next slide. Okay, so a list of some of the strategies that address those circularity priorities that are in the procurement policy. In no particular order here, recycled content. Recycling is part of the circular economy. I think the challenge we have is that people assume that it is the only part of a circular economy. It's not. It certainly is part of it. We've got great examples in Victoria. We've got companies like Close the Loop who are using toner cartridges to create products like toner plas. They're replacing virgin plastics with some of the products that they're using in roads. We've got Wholesome who are using low carbon concrete and culverts, so they're using fly ash in their products to reduce the embodied emissions, carbon greenhouse gas emissions. So we've got some really good examples of recycled content. Some of these other strategies, and if you look at the next one, there's a really scary looking icon there. So I do admit to an AI gremlin coming up with these icons, and it seems to have used a radioactive icon for refurbishment. I think it's looked at demolition and gone a bit nuts. But the refurbishment example, so refurbish in preference to demolition, the City of London has a great example here of requiring organisations to report on the carbon impact. So what's the carbon impact of any kind of development within the City of London? Now, what that means is that rather than demolish a building, refurbishment now becomes a priority because you can save greenhouse gas emissions through a refurbishment approach rather than demolition. And we've had in Sydney, the Key West, if you've been on the Quay, Circular Quay recently, and you look at this amazing new building, that's the Quay Tower that used, well, I think it was 2/3 of the existing structure to refurbish an existing building and build an entirely sort of part of a new structure around an existing structure. But in doing that, they retained a lot of the material. They reduced dramatically the greenhouse gas emissions as part of that built environment approach. And John Thwaites yesterday was talking at one of the events and saying that they were also received an economic benefit by being able to finish that project 12 months earlier and therefore releasing benefits and financial benefits by having a project that concluded 12 months sooner than they might otherwise had they demolished the building completely and started from scratch. Some of the other strategies you've got here: durability, design for repairability, reuse, reducing consumption. Those three strategies is a company called Schiavello. They develop a lot of your office equipment, your furniture, your chairs in the offices. I haven't got my notes in front of me, but there's an extraordinarily high number of tons of office furniture that goes to landfill every year in Australia, and 95% of that is sent to landfill. So Schiavello have a model whereby they're looking at designing material efficiency into their products and designing for reuse rather than recyclability. So they're preferencing remanufacturing rather than end-of-life recycling as part of their process. So they're looking at a different business model approach within the built environment. Last slide. I wanted to also talk about a GHD example. We're working with a restaurant chain to look at circularity and whole of life carbon. So those two big issues that I mentioned right at the start, net zero circularity, we're working with this group to reveal what whole of life carbon and circularity is. And in doing so, look at building an index that's based on a number of different metrics: embodied carbon, material loop, monomaterial, certified wood, disassembly potential, to create an index that gives a circularity potential for projects. I guess what I wanted to highlight here is the importance of data and the importance of metrics and the importance of reporting in decision making in the built environment in terms of achieving building waste, designing waste out and building waste in. So that's it from me. If you can stop. Thanks so much, Glenn, for jumping in there when everything went kaput on my end. We'll hand over now to Chris, who's going to give a presentation. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sarah. That was awesome. Glenn, are you gonna share the slides on your screen? Are you on my ones?
I think I will, just with the technical issues. So just let me know when you want to flick forward.
G'day, guys. My name is Chris Wilkinson, and I'm the Operations Manager at Revival Sustainable Practice. Thanks for inviting us here today, guys. It's great to be part of this, and thanks for supporting us as a small business. 10 minutes is pretty quick, so I'm going to have to fly through this, but I'm happy to take a heap of questions, and if there's a bit more detail, I'm happy to invite people down to our repurposing hub in Collingwood. So we set up Revival to change the way that the industry looks at existing resources. We are existing resources consultants, and that presents itself in a variety of ways. So we're a builder, we provide structural engineering design, we operate a timber mill, and we are a joiner and furniture maker. A large amount of existing resource is considered waste in construction, road projects, rail projects, etc. Where often trees and materials are being removed every day, and they're generally considered, they start to be considered at the point at which they become waste. And our goal has been to change the juncture at which people start to consider their existing resources, because that is the best way to prevent it from becoming waste. An easy example would be something we see every day or several times a week at least in our urban tree recovery initiative. Arborists will call us and they'll say they've just taken a tree down and it's either going to the mulcher or coming to us. So at that moment, that tree, that resource is being dealt with as an impromptu problem, and the probability of it becoming waste is very high. So we've dealt with this common scenario by making it very easy for an arborist to drop off a tree in a tip truck at our yard in Collingwood. They can just drive in, drop them off and leave. But this is an example of us saving a resource from becoming waste instead of the alternative approach, which is adopt more of a design thinking approach, look at trees before they become waste and design something really nice to incorporate a tree at the design phase of a project and maximize its utility. The equivalent scenario in construction is where the timber rafters in a house are dealt with once they're a pile of rubble, as opposed to being designed into the proposed development where they could be carefully salvaged to become joinery, a fence, a new structure, anything. Next slide, please, Glenn. This leads to our role as existing resource consultants. This photo is of our very first zero footprint repurposing hub in South Melbourne on City Road. We saved all of this structure from landfill, and in so doing saved more than 25 tonnes of sequestered carbon. As existing resources consultants, we go into buildings like this one. We examine all the existing materials and create a database for possible reuse opportunities. In reviewing the proposed design, we propose examples of what could be created from the existing materials. A most recent project is with YS Housing and Reservoir, where a school is being demolished to make way for 42 townhouses. On our first site visit, we were able to identify existing resources like floor joists and red gum structure supporting the outdoor balconies, as well as the trees that were scheduled for removal. And we did a quick review of the proposed drawings on that site visit, and we identified that the structure could easily be used as the screening that was going to go in front of every house. Every house had one or two vanities, so the vanity tops could be, most likely the underfloor structure could be used to create all the vanities, and then everyone who bought a house would have a small part of that existing resource in their house. So that's one example. We also, often under the scope of our existing resource consultancy, sorry, Glenn, next slide, please, mate. We provide structural engineering design. We can structurally grade timber, be it salvage structure or salvage timber from trees. And we can provide structural certification for repurposed or modified existing structure, be it brick, steel, or timber. Next slide, please, Glenn. We've been doing a lot of manufacturing recently. This photo, the photo in this slide is from our Easy Street redevelopment project, an adaptive reuse project on which we were the principal contractor. The huge Jarrah columns that had held up the first floor of this building for 100 years were condemned by the structural engineer, but we were able to reuse those as for a lot of the joinery in the building. And that includes this island bench. When we straightened those columns to create the flat top for that island bench, we had a lot of thin offcuts, and we were able to workshop a design with the architect to use those offcuts to create that weaved pattern that you can see on the front and sides of the undercarriage of that island bench. Next slide, please, Glenn. It's become really hard to access the type of infrastructure that's required to really effectively utilize existing resources. That's why we've created the Australia's only inner city timber mill. We've now got 2 mills running, a big strong tractor and a timber kiln that we use to dry trim timber to create furniture grade material. We're spread across 4,000 square meters, and we've dedicated this space to helping people to use the trees that are coming down within Melbourne, and to store and repurpose other materials like bricks, concrete, steel, and construction timber for reuse in projects. We don't get involved in why the trees come down, but in the case where a tree has to come down and comes across our path, we insist in maximising the use of that resource. Next slide, please. Did you get to the next slide, Glenn? Oh, thanks, mate. We've been working with councils, arborists, architects, and developers on these types of projects. For example, this project on the right is a simple job. We had to salvage and provide a bunch of, that's a salvage over 100 logs from different sites across Melbourne. I think we went to 8 different sites in the end to provide the steppers and habitat logs for this children's playground in Sunshine North. In this project, there's over 100 logs that were all destined for mulch or firewood, and that those will now become an engaging and sustainable play space for children. At the other end of the spectrum, we're heavily involved with the Melbourne Arts Precinct with Developments Vic and the NGV, and we've received over 30 plane trees from that site. Our deliverables for this project include feasibility reports and environmental impact reports, which provide data and facilitate reuse in a way that's never been done before in Australia. We're also creating a massive materials database of timber from our salvaged trees and materials at our Collingwood hub in an effort to make it more accessible for architects to specify salvaged timber. We're calling this the resource library. Recently, we had our first project with Breathe Architecture, where the architect specified material from our salvage resource library on their drawings, and we're currently making a benchtop for that project at Elizabeth Morgan House, which is a refuge for Indigenous women and children. Next slide, please, Glenn. Instead of selling resources and handling them as a commodity, we use our platform to implement a philosophy of custodianship. We only charge for the labour and services that we apply to the timber, such as transport, machining, or drying, or manufacturing. In this model, whether it's a piece of ironbark, red gum, or pine that we produced in our mill, there shouldn't really be much difference in price because we don't apply a dollar value to the resource in the way that you would in a typical custodianship model. This is to set an example of decommodifying the resource. When we deliver a project or pass on custodianship of some timber from our mill to a builder or a furniture maker, the custodian of that resource signs a custodianship agreement, which essentially says they agree to take care of it. They won't put it into landfill. And when they're finished with it, they'll find another use for it or pass it on to someone else. This photo was taken when we began this model, and the first custodianship agreements can be seen on the wall there. There's probably more like 30 or 40 of those now, as well as the ones that we've taken to our clients' offices, and we usually frame them and put them on the wall there when we complete a project. Next slide, please, Glenn. Some of you may have heard of the app that we launched last year. It's called the Revival Cooperative app. It's free to download and it's free to use, and its goal is to divert resource away from landfill. Next slide, please, Glenn. I think that's actually the end. I did delete a couple of slides because I was going way over time, but I'll leave it there and I'll pass it over to Cameron.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Sarah. That was awesome. I have quite a few slides and it's a lot to get through, so hoping today to impart a little bit of knowledge about where all of this fits in on a macroeconomic level, and then how individual organizations can actually participate in the transition that we need to see on an economy-wide level. Next slide, please. So my name is Cam. I'm a circular economy specialist with a consultancy called Coreo. Next slide, please. And we are a very small team and Australia's first and most awarded circular economy consultancy in a dedicated manner. And we are on a very big mission. Next slide, please. To transform economies to serve people and nature, and not the other way around. And the way that we do this is by working with all key economic sectors and at multiple scales as well. This gives us a really good understanding of what is going on in the market on a macro level, and then how that is translating to the different sectors and scales, and really allows us the perspective to connect the dots that are not being connected today. So why do we do this, and why do we want to transform the economy? Quite simply because today's economic model, it grows by taking from both people and planet. And today we have taken too much. So these are stats that you all might be familiar with, but today about 1/3 of our natural capital has been depleted. And the result of that extraction has led to some pretty gnarly environmental damage. So as of quite recently, actually, we just transgressed the 7th of our 9 planetary boundaries. Climate change is just one of those boundaries. So increasingly, we need a new economic model that is fit for purpose. And just a note here that the results of all this extraction have not been equally distributed. So today, 82% of all wealth is owned by the richest 10% of people. So we really urgently need new rules of the game in order to take less and to better distribute what we do take. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of where this leaves Australia's economy, just taking all those big global stats and bringing them down to a national level, not in a great place. So not just talking about the environment and society, but also the economy is suffering from this macro context. We're seeing huge losses in value from many of Australia's key sectors, and huge costs to the Australian economy in terms of managing, adapting to, and increasing resilience towards climatic changes that we are experiencing. Next slide, please. So that was a lot of doom and gloom, but there is a way out, and that's really where the circular economy comes in. So there are lots of different definitions to a circular economy. There's no globally agreed definition of a circular economy. But the definition you can see on the screen is how Coreo, the company I work for, defines a circular economy. So it is defined as an alternative economic model for meeting human needs and fairly distributing resources while restoring nature's functions and regenerating the natural capital on which we depend. Next slide, please. There's a lot of environmental value to be realized from that macroeconomic transition. Of course, we talk a lot about renewable energy, but that obfuscates the rest of the conversation about actual supply chains. What about the impact of the steel, the copper, the aluminum that's going into renewable energy assets? That's really where the circular economy can help. It can reduce biodiversity loss, of course, pollution, emissions. So really important to understand circular economy as not an extra thing to be added on top of a carbon or a nature strategy, but actually a how to achieve better outcomes in those areas. Next slide, please. And the financial case is strong as well. It's not just in terms of ESG strategies, it's also about better business performance. So we are seeing companies who are adopting circular strategies perform better than their peers, with better risk-adjusted returns, attributing more growth and more revenue from their circular product and service offerings. And we're really expecting to see these offerings, the revenue from these offerings actually grow as their value is increasingly realized for what it is in the market. So this all sounds pretty good, but now just gonna briefly drill into how an individual entity can actually participate. So next slide, please. So a really important thing to understand firstly is that the circular economy and circularity are two different things. The circular economy is the macroeconomic system. And economies can be at a local scale, a regional scale, a national scale, a global scale. But when we're talking about a circular economy, it is an economy. No one organization can do economy. So really, it's about an individual organization or entity adopting circularity through the principles, the business models that Sarah mentioned, the design principles that Revival are working on, etc., in order to contribute to that macroeconomic transition. So yeah, what does this look like actually in practice on the ground as relevant to the built environment and the infrastructure sector? Next slide, please. Well, I'm sure many of you may have heard of the R ladder. Right now in Australia, we're really seeing a lot of bundling of different R's. So we'll see targets for recycled content and reuse of materials in the same, let's say, target or KPI, but really they are not the same. And a proof point on this slide, we're actually finding that reusing products, and in this case, steel offers substantially more value than using recycled versions of those products. So the higher you go up the R ladder, the greater the value you can generate, both in terms of impacts avoided and costs avoided as well, because procuring new recycled steel beam is a lot less expensive than retaining ownership of a reusable steel beam and reusing it redeploying it many times over and over again. So a few examples of the R ladder on this slide. So going from the top, actually thinking about refusing and rethinking things altogether. In roads, for example, we're seeing a lot of countries overseas remove roads, and we're seeing actually contractors and infrastructure companies diversify into not just road building, but road removal, and actually contributing to those active walkways and climate adaptation goals that were a market area that they weren't able to position themselves in before that diversification play. Reduce R2, so doing the same thing with less material, pretty much. An example of this in practice might be topology optimization. Can we get the same structural performance with less concrete? R3 is reuse, so simply reusing materials in their same form. Very different from recycling, where you have to actually break down that material and then transform it into a new type of product. Repairing and refurbishing, this is about keeping that same product in its current form and function in use for longer. R5, recycling. So as I said, the processing and separation of residuals, so those need to be sort of melted down and then built back up into a new product. And then finally, recover, which is waste to energy. Now, a lot of the market in Australia plays in those last two R's. There's a huge blue ocean actually to be realized in all these other R's that right now there aren't really the capabilities and services offered that much in the Australian market, but they can offer substantially more carbon reductions, nature impact reductions, cost savings to the market, and leapfrog current efforts today. And it's really where we need to head. Next slide, please. So a really key point here is that aiming higher on that R ladder can be better unlocked through better design. If we don't think about what the next use might be of this material in the design phase, we're locked into just managing it as waste on the back end. So a great example of actually designing in the capabilities for higher circularity is design for disassembly. On this slide, you can see a couple examples of blocks that can be used for highway dividers and barriers, etc. but also machinery. So in Melbourne, there was the disassembly of the Metro Tunnel TBMs. These were dismantled and then put back together for reuse on other projects. Often this is not the case, and that stuff actually just gets broken down for recycling when it could have had multiple uses afterwards. Next slide, please. So yeah, and huge value in sort of going further upstream and venturing into the design phase. So on this slide, you can see a sort of depiction of how the market really works today. We don't think about the value of materials that are flowing through our assets in our portfolios. So right now, a developer might, buy a brownfield site, pay for that site to be cleared, and then want to build a 5-star, 6-star, green star building and buys recycled concrete and steel at a premium, which is made from the very materials that they just paid to get off their site. So through better design, we can actually retain ownership, retain the value of these materials. And in an increasingly resource-stressed world, to my original points about sort of, reaching the limits of our natural capital, there is even more value to be found in moving towards those higher order of circularities. We're actually running out of the key materials that we use to build things. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick mention of a resource that can help you move into this sort of design for disassembly space. So this is a open source template that Coreo, my company, and Built worked on together, launched with the GBCA earlier this year, and it's actually a guide to support practitioners in the built environment infrastructure sectors in actually designing their assets for disassembly and recording that information, because there's no use in it being disassemblable if in 10 years time that information is lost and nobody knows if you can get it out and how to get it out. So recording that information is a really important part about ensuring that materials get reused in multiple cycles. And this is an open source tool that's ready, available for download. You can look it up to help you move into that space. And just a quick closing note. Next slide, please. There's a lot of circular momentum in Australia, which means that there is increasing demand to actually help the market move in this direction. We need those design for disassembly products. We need those design for disassembly services in market to help the market actually get there. There's the National Circular Economy Framework that's going to be released later this year, that's going to be introducing some really different new targets into market, like a reduction in material footprint, reduction overall in materials used, not just looking at embodied carbon or recycled content, but really looking at the big picture. So there's really an opportunity for contractors, suppliers, local, state governments to start helping the market step forward into this space. And last slide. Thanks, Glenn. Coreo did a study of the current circular maturity in Australian businesses last year. And most businesses in Australia see huge value in circularity, but only see it as applied internally. It will help me reduce costs. It'll help me increase efficiency. And it's also mostly seen as a downstream waste management solution. We really would advocate for the circular economy to be seen as a market opportunity, real value in circularity, capturing a slice of that pie that the circular economy is predicted to bring the Australian economy, is about actually diversifying, moving into that space, offering the circular products and services needed to support that transition. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. Thanks, Chris. Chris, if you're around, are you able to put your camera back on, and we'll just have a couple of questions to go through. We've got one actually. Just before we get into Megan submitted a question. I thought one of the points that you made, Cameron, around the higher order use and the need for value add was really nicely articulated by your entire business model, Chris. You know, you can salvage those trees; they could easily be converted to mulch, couldn't they? But actually, you're taking them and adding significant value and into those products through the business model that you have. The question that Megan has asked, if there's anything similar elsewhere in Australia, and I'm guessing that Megan means maybe your business that you've come across, but I'm also going to take some license with regard to interpreting this question with regard to the piece at the end where you have your piece around decommodifying your resource, and you have that commitment where someone is taking that resource and they're agreeing to take custodianship of that product, which puts value and ownership and ensuring that that product will never reach landfill. So I guess from those two perspectives, again, Megan, taking some license with your question, are you aware of anything, Chris, similar to what your business model is, or similar to the decommodifying the resource and the commitment, the stewardship commitment you're asking of your clients to take?
Within Australia, I'm not aware of anything else that's similar to that. No, the simplest and the easiest model is to just sell things for a material value and treat them as commodities. That's what our society sort of capitalism works around. So I haven't heard of any other, certainly not timber oriented or resource oriented businesses that have a custodianship model. No.
I think
Yeah.
I think that the as a service business model is another way that the market is committing to resource stewardship. So for example, Koskela, who recently offered a furniture as a service subscription model, yeah, they're actually becoming stewards of that materials, but via a commercial commitment versus like a memorandum of understanding. Yeah, so it's showing up in different places, I think.
The similar concept, renting
Yeah.
something as opposed to owning it. Yeah, that's a very similar concept. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'll go to another question from Marie Amelie. So Cameron, it's around the barriers for circularity and circular economy uptake. I know you looked at the differences between those two terms. Any points you want to add there around barriers?
Yeah, I mean, so many, but a lot of opportunity as well. I think the circular economy, an economy will change by many actors within that economy changing. So really, I might focus the answer on the barriers to uptake of circularity of the individual and the actors in the economy changing. One significant barrier is a lack of understanding of what circularity is. A lot of people see it as a waste management end of pipe solution when it's really a huge opportunity to actually diversify a whole business into a new way of doing things or new market segments that weren't previously open to that business. Another barrier is in terms of the lack of understanding, as I said, is the grouping of the different levels of circularity. Reused and recycled materials are very different things, offer very different environmental value, social value. Why would I recycle a TV, get it exported offshore versus repair it and give somebody a job locally instead of having that material go all across the world? But it's actually cheaper for me today to buy a new TV than it is to get it to be repaired. So there's a lot more I could speak to, but I'll stop there. Just the current sort of incentives in market are a little bit behind where we need to be. And those who truly understand circular need to be speaking more articulately about their value proposition in this area and what it offers, versus like, oh, we have recycled content. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll also have a go at answering that, because the paper that I referenced that we delivered looked at barriers for translating circular economy from a theory to practice in Australia. So we identified 21, and the most frequently cited, one of the ones I said was businesses not prioritising the changes needed for circular economy, which is a bit in contrast to what you were presenting with your findings, Cameron. Your survey was people applying it internally. We found, with regard to looking across Australia, the barriers were businesses not prioritising, standards and regulation, high cost of transport, and lack of government incentives were the top most common barriers. And that's why I found it so interesting that we need these case studies. We need to be enabling the case studies, sharing awareness, but at the same time trying to replicate those case studies. So Cameron, your software that you talked about with regard to reuse, yeah, if we can get that applied once, but how do we get that applied consistently or adopted? How do we get more organizations adopting that approach? Let's chat about challenges and then go through to, say, an enablers question. Oh, we've got more questions coming in. Hold the phone. Hang on a second. Robert said, oh, your popularist response is we already recycle. Yeah, I think what you're referring to there, Roberto, is that common misconception that I referred to. Is a lot of people think circular economy is recycling, is rebranded recycling, and it's not. That whole higher order thing, that the value piece that Cameron was talking to, and really Chris's whole business model is more than just recycling. The question from Roberto: does the panel have any tips or suggestions on how to start mature conversations around circularity, rather than the way it's currently viewed as a populist view and the populist response? And the populist piece was, we already recycle. So what are the tips that the two of you might suggest for how to have a mature conversation around circular economy and improve knowledge and awareness? I might go to you first, Chris. How do you have those conversations?
I'm inclined, obviously, as per my whole presentation, inclined to just give examples of how it works. Show people photos of furniture and outcomes that can be achieved, project examples of I think that's the most powerful way to do it, is to show what you can achieve using the stuff that you already have. So this doesn't apply to everyone, but if anyone wants to have a conversation about circular economy, I'd invite a group down to the workshop and show them examples of projects we've done where we've achieved real outcomes that set an example for our industry, construction, manufacturing, and essentially the reuse part of any industry can be seen in our workshop and the things that we do. Hope that answered the question.
Love it. Yeah, you make it real, and you've got those commitments on the walls as well. What about you, Cameron?
I mean, yeah, love that, Chris. And we often show pictures on the slide of stuff being done. It's absolutely not crazy new. It's happening on the ground and possible. I think a big one is because the market doesn't understand circular, really, you have to actually show that its value. So if you're actually advocating for, let's say, a client or the firm you work for to use reused materials over recycled, and they have a scope 3 target in place, show them the difference in the embodied carbon of that reused material versus that recycled material that they're not looking at right now, because they don't see salvaged reuse as an option, and they think that they're ticking a box by recycled content. And that's on the inflow side. On the outflow side, again, I think it's a value framing. Through a circular approach, you could be making far more value, environmental, social, and economic, out of the materials that you manage. And right now you're seeing them as waste, but let's say you have food waste coming out of or spoil coming out of a site. Instead of diverting it from landfill, what if you actually directed it to somewhere that can provide value, like to regenerating super degraded Australian soils. Australia has some of the worst soil health in the world. Then a company who has a carbon target, a nature target, a social target, community health target, you can actually, because you know where it went and you put it somewhere where it's valuable, you can actually measure it. So now you're not just talking about a diversion from waste target. You can measure carbon sequestration in the soils where you put that stuff. There's the carbon decarb strategy. You can measure biodiversity brought back to that regenerated site. You can measure increased nutritional value of the crops that were grown on that site. And so through intentional direction of materials, intentional use of materials, you can get more value out of it, but you have to show that to the market through better measurement.
Yeah, and I think I'd add to that. I think it's sort of implicit in what you were saying there, Cameron, and what I was trying to show in the slides I had, those two goals of net zero and circular economy. Circular economy can help you achieve your decarbonisation goals, your decarbonisation targets. So a question around challenges. So what are the key challenges, some of the challenges for planning for use of recycled materials, say, in a construction project? So how might that challenge be addressed? So Chris, do you want to have a go at that one?
The common challenges have been aesthetics. Around using recycled timber, for example. The easiest example is recycled timber. There is a look to recycled timber that often architects or whole projects want to steer away from. Recycled timber can have a grungy sort of beaten up appearance. Often there's nail holes. That's often a challenge, is the aesthetic challenge, selling that to getting that sort of recycled materials across a lot of projects, steering away from a look, which is something that we have been able, as a problem we have been able to solve by having a lot of different examples of recycled timber looks in our nice clean examples in our workshop. In addition to that, having the resource of lots of trees coming from arborists, which are still salvaged and recycled materials, expanding that into a portfolio where on a drawing you can specify red gum or macrocarpa timbers, really nice timbers that are still salvaged and achieve a big variety of different looks because of that diversity of what we have, the portfolio that we've put together. We've sort of solved that problem of the rigidity of the aesthetic that you can achieve with recycled timbers, and we can both show them examples with standard recycled messmate or recycled Oregon, where we've got a really clean look from that, but we can also go into the sort of really special timbers and produce a really clean look from those sort of timbers, and it's all still salvaged. So the aesthetic look has always been a barrier, and I think we're sort of getting really well ahead of solving that problem.
Yeah, and I'll add one to that, which is that using recycled content in some projects, sometimes the life cycle costing or the operational cost of an asset is not considered above the purchase price. That can be a challenge. I don't know whether that's a challenge you also find with regard to costing. Say a curated reusable product may be more a higher value than say a mass produced virgin, product that might not last as long. I don't know whether that comes into some of the challenges you also have to deal with, Chris.
Yeah, it can it can be more expensive to use recycled.
Well, I think we've lost Chris. Before we finish, I think and I know Glenn's going to come along and close things up. I just wanted to throw to you, Cameron and Chris, if you had any sort of final comments that you want to add before we close off.
Yeah, I mean, I think Australia, in seeing materials as waste is a human construct. We choose to not see the value in materials, and by viewing materials as waste, Australia and the businesses and the people in Australia and the Australian environment are losing out. There's a huge opportunity to actually link that up, not just be creative about how we're managing stuff on the back end, but link it up to the upstream. That's when things really get interesting, and that's where we really need support, and there's value to be found in starting to move in that direction.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll just add, oh, there you go. Chris, you're back. Anything final you want to add?
Sorry, guys, I just dropped out halfway through my sentence, didn't I?
Yeah, we got nothing.
Oh, no. Thank you very much for having us. And it was lovely to be here with you guys.
Yeah, cool. Lovely. Glenn, are you around? Do you want to take us out?
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you to all our panelists today. I'll just take the liberty of speaking on behalf of the audience to say that there are a lot of really thought-provoking insights put forward in all three presentations, and a really great discussion in the Q&A as well. So yeah, thank you again, Sarah, Cameron, and Chris for your time today. The next session in Greener Infrastructure Week is Contract Incentives to Drive Sustainable Outcomes, which is at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And we also have modular design in infrastructure construction at 1 o'clock. So feel free to scan the QR code or jump on the Ecologic website and register for those sessions if you haven't already. And finally, thank you to everyone in the audience for attending today, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. I'll just leave the screen up for a little bit with the QR code, but otherwise, yep, have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. See you guys.